What was meant to be a peaceful day at Balmoral turned into a heart-wrenching royal moment no one saw coming. When Princess Charlotte found herself face to face with unexpected cruelty from Queen Camilla, his grandson, it was Prince George who came running, no hesitation, no fear. In a moment of pure bravery, he stepped between them, protecting his sister like a true future king. But once the danger passed, George broke down in tears, shaken to his core. What followed next sent shockwaves through the royal household and may have changed everything behind palace walls. Balmoral, a day that was supposed to heal it all, began on a warm sunny afternoon at Balmoral Castle, Scotland's royal getaway. The family had gathered for what was supposed to be a peaceful and healing weekend. The air smelled of fresh pine, dogs barked in the distance. Ensigns and royal staff buzzed quietly in the background. Everything looked picture perfect on the outside, but behind the scenes there was a deeper reason for the gathering. Camilla had reached out to William and Catherine, asking them to join her side of the family at Balmoral. She called it a fresh start, hoping the quiet countryside might smooth out royal tensions that had been building for months. For William and Catherine, the invitation was delicate. Accepting it meant trying to put personal feelings aside, especially after years of subtle snubs and awkward public moments involving Camilla. But they agreed, not for themselves, but for the children. Maybe, just maybe, a relaxed setting could help everyone move forward. Balmoral had always felt different. It was Queen Elizabeth's sanctuary, where titles faded and people simply spent time together. The idea was to keep things light indoors, the children running freely outdoors, and maybe a few photos to show the world a united front. So while the adults sat inside sipping tea and making polite conversation, the children were sent out to play. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were joined by Freddie and Gus, Camilla, his grandsons from her first marriage. The adults believed the kids would get along fine. After all, they were just children. What could possibly go wrong? But as the sun hit its peak and the laughter of children echoed across the lawn, something darker began to take shape far from where the tea was being poured and the small talk carried on. What no one realized then was that this was the moment everything would shift. A simple afternoon meant to repair relationships would soon reveal cracks deeper than anyone expected. Unsupervised moments where it all began outside in the massive gardens of Balmoral. The children played freely with no strict structure and no adult eyes watching closely. It looked like a fun and easygoing time. The garden was huge, hedges, fountains, and winding paths where little feet could disappear without being noticed. George, Charlotte, and Louis laughed as they ran through the grass, playing games only siblings understand. Not far from them were Freddie and Gus, Camilla, his grandsons, who had joined in, at least for a while. At first it looked like typical childhood interaction, but not all kids play the same way. And this time something started to feel off. The staff assumed it was harmless. They saw 5 young royals in the garden and figured all was well. But just beyond the hedges something was happening. Something they couldn't see, a quiet moment of teasing that quickly crossed the line. The issue wasn't visible from the windows or even from the garden paths, but hidden in one of the hedged corners of the state. Charlotte had been separated from the group. She was now alone, and someone was standing in her way. Yet no one knew that the quiet, playful energy outside was already turning. The tone was changing. Words were being exchanged that should never be said. What started as innocent play was about to become something that would shake the entire family and leave one young prince changed forever. Freddie's mockery, the words that sparked it. It happened quickly, almost like a storm passing through calm skies. Freddie, Camilla, his grandson, had cornered Princess Charlotte near the tall hedges, out of sight and out of reach. What was said next would never be forgotten. "You think you're better than us just because you'll be queen someday. That's pathetic." Freddie snapped, his voice sharp. A mocking Charlotte, caught off guard, froze. She wasn't used to this kind of hostility, especially not from someone in the family. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. She wasn't a little girl playing dress-up. She was the target of someone else's jealousy. Freddie wasn't finished. He pointed a wooden stick at her, poking it toward her shoulder. Not enough to harm, but enough to make a clear threat. What scared no princess, he sneered. At that moment something cracked. A joyful mood in the garden shattered. Charlotte screamed, not loudly, but enough for someone to hear. What had started as teasing had turned into a moment of real fear. Charlotte wasn't just being bullied, she was being intimidated, and she was alone. But not for long. Across the garden someone heard her, and that someone came running faster than anyone expected. George's heroic sprint across the garden. Prince George didn't wait a second. He heard Charlotte scream. He took off, no hesitation, no second thought. He sprinted across the lawn, dodging rose bushes and garden benches, his eyes locked on the hedge where the sound came from. What he found behind those hedges shocked him. Charlotte was cornered. Freddie was still holding the stick. George's breath caught, but his instincts kicked in before fear had a chance. He stepped in front of his sister and shouted, "Don't touch my sister." His voice wasn't just loud, it was furious. In that split second, he wasn't a prince, he was a big brother protecting someone he loved. Freddie backed up, slightly surprised, but George didn't stop. He grabbed Freddie's arm and pushed him back with everything he had. It wasn't a full fight, no punches, but it was a real scuffle, the kind that only happens when someone crosses the line. Charlotte ran behind George, clutching his shirt tightly. George stood in front of her, chest heaving, fists clenched. He was only 9, but in that moment he was braver than most adults. No staff had reached them yet. No adults had seen what just happened. But two things were clear: Charlotte was safe and George had made sure of it. But bravery has a cost, and that cost was about to show. The aftermath: George's tears and trembling. As soon as the danger passed, the emotion hit him like a wave. George stood still, fists still clenched, trying not to cry. But his shoulders shook, his lip quavered, and when Charlotte whispered, "It's okay now," he couldn't hold it in anymore. He began to cry, not loud sobs, a deep trembling tears that came from the shock of it. All the adrenaline was gone, and in its place was pure emotion, fear, anger, relief. All of it crashing down. A royal aide, who witnessed the scene later, said he tried to be brave, but it hit him all at once. George didn't cry because he was hurt, he cried because he had been terrified for his sister, and when it was over, the weight of that moment was too much. Charlotte wrapped her arms around him tightly. She didn't speak, she just held on. That small gesture said everything. They had each other. For a few moments they stayed like that, tucked behind the hedge, the rest of the world unaware. But the emotional scar was already there. George had stepped up, he protected his sister, but he'd also had to face something no child should fear for someone they love. And just when the two children needed comfort the most, Hello arrived. Camilla arrives and chooses sides. When Camilla arrived at the scene, she wasn't rushing with concern. She wasn't looking around in a panic to check on the children. No, she came out calmly, almost annoyed, like someone had been pulled away from their cup of tea for something that didn't matter. But what she walked into was not a simple playground disagreement. George was still crying, his fists red from being clenched so tight. Charlotte clung to him, clearly shaken. Freddie stood off to the side, scowling, but quiet. Any grandmother would have gone straight to the children in distress, but not Camilla. She walked past George and Charlotte as if they weren't even there and went straight to Freddie. Then came the words that made staff nearby stiffen. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said sharply, her voice from "Boys defend girls, that's what happens." It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, dismissive, cold, as if George's tears were some sort of weakness, not the result of protecting his sister from a real threat. She didn't ask what happened, she'd do and check if Charlotte was okay. All focus was only on her grandson, rushing the dirt off his jacket, smoothing his hair, ignoring the actual victims. Two aides who witnessed the moment said it was deeply uncomfortable. One whispered. She didn't even look at Charlotte. It was clear Camilla wasn't interested in what really happened. She had already chosen a side, and that side wasn't with William's children. Unfortunately for her, William had just stepped outside. William steps in. Protective father mode activated. Prince William doesn't lose his temper often. He's known for staying calm under pressure, measured, composed like his grandmother taught him. But every parent has their limit. And what he saw next pushed him straight past his. He stepped outside just in time to hear Camilla, his words, "Don't be dramatic." He saw his son crying, his daughter hugging him, and Camilla, she was comforting Freddie. In that moment something snapped in him. He walked straight over, his voice louder than usual, and said sharply, "He's 9, Camilla. He's crying because he thought his sister was in danger, and you call that drama." The words cut through the air like a knife. Camilla blinked, caught off guard. For a split second, no one said a word. William didn't raise his voice further. He didn't need to. His tone carried the full weight of a furious father. Camilla response, she scoffed, brushed off his words, then muttered something under her breath. "Just childish games," and walked away. One staffer standing nearby later admitted, "That was the most tension I've ever seen between them." He looked at her like she was a stranger. William turned back to his children kneeling down beside them. George's cheeks were still red. Charlotte held onto her brother, refusing to let go. In that moment, William wasn't just a future king. He was a father defending his son's heart and his daughter's dignity. But the person who would bring the true comfort was just steps behind. Catherine's arrival, a mother's warm embrace. Catherine arrived moments later, her heels clicking softly on the stone pathway, unaware of the scene she was about to walk into. She had only just stepped outside to check on the children, expecting to find them playing in the garden. But the second she turned the corner and saw their faces, everything else disappeared. The lawn, the staff, the sound of birds, even Camilla standing nearby. It all faded into the background. Her eyes locked onto George, his cheeks red and wet with tears. Charlotte, clutching her brother's hand tightly, was visibly shaken. No words were needed. Catherine could feel it. Something had gone very wrong. She didn't hesitate, no formality, no royal posture. She rushed forward and dropped to her knees, wrapping both arms around them, pulling them in without asking a single question. Her hand moved gently to George's face, wiping away a tear with her thumb. "You protected her," she whispered, her voice slow and steady, the kind of voice only mothers have been. Moments like these, just like Papa would have. George's breath hitched, his eyes still glossy, his face filled with a mix of confusion, pride, and sadness. He whispered back, "I didn't want her to get hurt, Mom. That broke her." But she didn't show it. She kept her face calm, kept her touch firm and comforting. There was no panic, no drama, no fuss. Just a mother grounding her children with warmth in the middle of emotional chaos. Charlotte leaned into her mother's chest, talking her face into the familiar comfort of her mother's shoulder. Her hands gripped the edge of Catherine's blouse tightly, like she didn't want to let go. George, still rattled, finally let himself break down. Not the kind of loud crying that gets attention, but the silent, heavy kind. The kind that only comes when you've been holding it in for too long. Catherine held them both, one arm around each, her head bent low as she whispered softly to them. Her body became a shield, a wall of calm in a moment that had already done enough damage. She didn't look at Camilla. She didn't have to. Everything she needed to know was in her children's eyes, and everything Camilla needed to understand was in Catherine's silence. One of the staff standing a short distance away would later say the way she held them, it was like she was shielding them from the whole world. Catherine didn't demand an explanation. She didn't lecture. She knew enough. Just by holding them, she stood slowly, keeping George and Charlotte close as they walked back toward the house. Her expression unreadable, but her decision already made. This wasn't something she would forget. And as the evening unfolded, with formal smiles, stiff conversations, and a royal dinner ahead, it would be Catherine's silence, not her words, that spoke loudest in the hours to come. The silent dinner that spoke volumes that evening, as the sun dipped behind the Balmoral hills and shadows stretched across the state. The royal family gathered at the grand oak dining table. The same table where generations had sat, where traditions were passed, and where silence on this night said far more than any toast or speech ever could. The setting was formal as always. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. Silver cutlery was perfectly aligned, but something was off, deeply off. The atmosphere was tense, thick enough to feel in your throat. Every clink of a fork echoed just a little too loud. Nobody dared mention what had happened outside earlier that day. Catherine sat still, almost statuesque, her back straight, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes focused only on her children or her plate. Not once did she turn toward Camilla, not even when spoken to. Her silence wasn't rude. It was intentional, deliberate, controlled. And that silence was deafening. William, seated beside her, kept his tone composed, but the shift in his energy was obvious. He engaged when necessary, thinking a footman speaking softly to George. But when Camilla tried to bring him into conversation, his answers were short and cold, leaving no room for warmth. Camilla, for her part, played it as if nothing had happened. She laughed lightly with her grandsons Freddie and Gus, even making a comment about how boys will be boys. But her light remarks felt forced, and the room wasn't buying it. Or occasional glances at Catherine were never returned. Not once. A Palace insider later shared you could have cut the silence with a knife. Catherine didn't have to say a word. Her entire presence was a statement. The children felt it too. George, who was usually lively during mealtimes, sat with his head slightly lowered. He didn't say much, but his eyes kept flicking toward Charlotte, who stayed quietly beside him. Every so often their shoulders would brush. It was subtle, but noticeable. He was still, watching over her. That dinner wasn't loud. There were no arguments, no shouting, and yet the emotional volume was at its highest. The rift was right there on the table between the plates of roast lamb and the carefully poured wine. No one dared mention what had happened, but no one could pretend it hadn't. By the time a delicate summer tarts was served, even the staff had stopped trying to ease the mood. A footman moved more quietly than usual. The servers kept their heads slightly bowed, picking up on every cue. The lightness, the tradition, the family togetherness, all of it was gone. And as the family rose from the table that evening, something unspoken had settled in the air, something permanent. This wasn't just a family tension that would blow over. This was a turning point. It was the kind of memory that wouldn't fade with time. It would be remembered quietly but clearly. As the night, everything between them changed. Catherine's private words reveal her pain. That night, after the tension-filled dinner, and after the children had finally gone to bed, the halls of Balmoral fell into a heavy silence. Most lights were off. The voices had quieted, but inside Catherine's private quarters something was stirring, not noise, but a feeling that refused to settle. She sat by the window for a long while, the same window that overlooked the garden where it had all happened, the same spot where she had seen her children moments after their world had been shaken, and eventually she called for someone, a trusted aide, someone who had been with her since the early days of her marriage, someone who understood the difference between royal duty and real human emotion. Catherine didn't cry, she didn't raise her voice, but the weight in her tone said more than tears ever could. She spoke softly, each word careful, deliberate. When your children are being hurt, she began, eyes fixed on the floor, and your own family turns away, it stays with you. She wasn't making a statement for attention. She wasn't venting anger. These were the wrong words of a mother who had just watched her son break down after defending his sister, only to have their pain dismissed like it meant nothing. She explained how she had seen the panic and George's eyes, the way his little body shook, how he held back tears until it overwhelmed him. She described Charlotte's tiny hands trembling as they clutched her mother's clothes, too young to understand what just happened, but old enough to feel unsafe. What troubled Catherine most wasn't just the incident itself. It was the fact that nobody on Camilla's side even noticed. No apology, no concern, no moment of recognition that something had gone horribly wrong. It's not about politics anymore, she added firmly, her voice low but steady. It's about trust, and that trust, she admitted, had been shattered. The aide, known for her professionalism and her calm nature, later confessed, that was the first time I saw her look truly hurt, not angry, not cold, just heartbroken. Catherine wasn't someone who created drama. She didn't shout, didn't storm off, didn't make threats. But that night her silence became a statement all on its own. It echoed through every hallway. Everyone who saw her the next day could feel the distance she had placed, not just physically but emotionally. She could still be warm and public, she could still smile for the cameras, she could still play the part. But behind closed doors something had changed permanently. Line had been crossed, and once it was crossed, a wall was quietly built, one that would not come down easily, no matter how many smiles were forced at royal events. From that moment on, Catherine's trust was broken, and her silence It was louder than any royal headline. George's sweet but heartbreaking request. In the days that followed Balmoral, everything went back to normal on the surface. But behind the palace walls, something had changed in Prince George. He didn't say much about what happened. He didn't bring it up during lessons or mention it at breakfast. But his actions spoke for him. One morning, George quietly approached a staff member, someone he trusted, and asked for a favor. "Can I have a photo of me and Charlotte, one from when we were happy?" he asked softly. The staffer, caught off guard by the request, nodded of course. Why, George, his answer was simple but devastating. "To keep her safe while I sleep." That one sentence said everything. The moment behind the hedge had left a mark, not just fear, but a deep sense of responsibility. He was the big brother, and in his mind, he had one job now: protect Charlotte no matter what. The photo he chose was one from a family outing: Charlotte laughing, George holding her hand, both of them in casual clothes, without any royal formality. It was printed and placed C.